Funding is limited. It's $1,000 per person or $2,000 per household, depending on what you're applying for. Will determine how many times you can apply. So a person can actually apply for an in-state event and an out-of-state event in the same year and still get funding. If a person wants to attend an out-of-state event 2 years in a row, we would only be able to fund one of those conferences. We typically give it a 2-year waiting period. So let's say if you apply for funding to attend a national conference in 2013, you wouldn't be able to apply in 2014 for funding. But if you came back this year and applied for funding, then we would be able to approve that. Going forward, for national events or anything outside of Indiana, it would be every 2 years. Typically in-state, it's every 1 year. So if you were to apply for the iAd conference coming up at Conner Prairie, we would be able to fund that, but we wouldn't be able to fund anything in December. In 2016, if there was another in-state event that you wanted to go to, we would be able to fund that, but we wouldn't be able to fund 2 in-state events in 1 year. So we try and spread the funding out to multiple people so that we get as many people involved as possible.
Now to NAD.
Okay.
NAD, so want to go to that?
Yes. So the Consumer Investment Fund is perfect for people who want to go to the National Association of the Deaf's conference in Phoenix, Arizona. I understand that the dates for that is July 2016. I would recommend that if you're interested in going to that conference and you need additional funding, to get your application in March or April with me. That gives me enough time to review the budget. It gives me enough time to make sure that if we need to make travel arrangements for a person, we can help with that. The application does follow the state's travel guidelines, so there is a process to it. We do want to make sure that we get as many people going as possible, but we also want to make sure that we have enough time to get to those people and to get the applications approved. So I would recommend, if you're looking for funding and you would qualify.
The income restriction?
There's not an income restriction. We look typically for people who are applying. We would approve a person who has SSI, SSDI, TANF or SNAP benefits. Those are typically the income that we look at for approval. If you don't have any of those, you can still apply, but you would have to pay 50% of the total expense. So let's say you were applying for $1,000 for this trip. You would have to pay $500 of that, and we would pay the other $500. If the trip is more than $1,000, which flying to Arizona, hotel room, registration costs, when you start adding everything up, more than likely it's going to be more than $1,000. If you're able to pay $1,000 towards that, we would still pay the other. It just depends on what your budget looks like, the total cost of everything, and what you're able to pay. If you have SSI, you do qualify for advanced funding. So what that means is that we would be able to pay the conference registration, the hotel, and car rental fee in advance so that you'd be able to attend. We don't cover airfare typically in advance because if somebody were to cancel, those are typically non-reimbursable expenses. So that becomes complicated. But if we know that the person is going to go without a doubt, we can start the reimbursement process sooner. We do cover food per diem in advance, so that's definitely, if you have SSI, something that you want to consider. If you have SSDI or TANF, you're not required to pay 50%. because we know that people who typically have those benefits still have some income restrictions. We would typically ask that the food per diem or mileage be used as the matching contribution, and we would pay the rest. So I typically recommend that when people have SSDI or TANF benefits or SNAP, that you use your food per diem and mileage as your match, and you allow the Consumer Investment Fund to cover the cost of lodging and any kind of higher expense items. So your airfare, your conference registration. Some people require child care. CIF does cover child care that will allow you to attend the event. And this does $2,000 per household. So if you are a parent who is deaf and you also have a child who is deaf, both individuals would qualify for that funding, especially if the child is registered for the conference and planning on attending sessions. The only time we don't cover children is if they are not involved in the workshop. We like to see as much involvement as possible, and we know that our youth are really powerful advocates in their community and can reach out to students, other students, and kids their age. So we want to make sure we include them as well. But let's say you have a toddler or a 4-year-old and they're not going to be going to the workshop with you, and there is child care at the conference, then that's when we would pay for the child care. It doesn't mean that we wouldn't cover their food per diem. We'd still include that as their food per diem, but we would definitely want to help pay for child care expenses. But we can go over that individually in this application.